Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming down this afternoon, a Saturday afternoon, to spend time with us. It's a pleasure to see all of you here for our program titled Weavers, Mediators, a panel on textile materiality. The discussion is looking into exploring dimensional and gendered notions of textile materiality. And this is held in conjunction with our annual Ung Fong Roof Garden Commission, GLISTEN, by Aotearoa New Zealander artist Lisa Rahana. My name is Chini. I'm also the curator for GLISTEN, and I'm your host today. Today, we are honored to have Dr. Welyne Jehom, Karl Leonard, Wafa Ghnaim, with us to share more about the material histories of Iban Sarawak, Māori, and Palestinian textiles. For this afternoon, the rundown of today's program would start with Dr. Welyne's presentation on Pua Kumbu, titled Sacred versus the Profane, followed by Tānikotia Tiao, Color the World by Karl Leonard, looking into ancestral practices of the Māori. And we will have a short break after these two presentations. And after that, we will conclude with Wafa's presentation of the timeless trope, land, heritage, and culture in Palestinian dress. There will be a short discussion and a Q&A session after the presentation. And after this program has concluded, I'm sure you have seen some of the display of the marvelous textiles in the entrance foyer when you came in. So we will invite you to go there to have a look at these marvelous textiles that our speakers have very graciously brought with them today, as sort of like showing examples of what they have been looking at in their presentations. So without further ado, please allow me to welcome Dr. Welyne. Welyne is a senior lecturer in the Department of Anthropology and Sociology and a member of the Bidayu, an indigenous group from Sarawak, East Malaysia. Specializing in community development and engagement, she empowers indigenous communities by facilitating skill and knowledge development by establishing community-based enterprises. So without further ado, please welcome Welyne.
Good afternoon, everybody, and greetings. And I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to be part of the panel today. And I would like to greet everyone and through this special cloth that I have, which is called Jambatan Nangapangau, means the suspension bridge that bridge human and all the gods and goddess up there and give us strength and also enrich us with indigenous knowledge. Okay, I can't share everything with you today, so I'm going to pinpoint a few important things that I would like to share with IC as very important. So I'm going to share with you about the textile. Yeah, of course, I'm going to speak about the textile. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. So I purposely leave that for you to read while I'm explaining to you and also to run down what I'm going to speak about. So I'm going to explain to you how this textile act as the canvas of documentation, which is the sacred part of the textile. Then I will go into Pua Kumbu as a shield that function in many rituals and ceremonies, but I will just briefly explain. And then I will go into Pua Kumbu as the expressions of women claiming power, since we also speak about gender. And also I will explain to you how Pua Kumbu become the representations of Iban identity. But before that, I would like to share with you the folklore and stories that actually used by the Iban people to explain when they would like to share the knowledge of this textile. Okay. Once upon a time, actually it does not start like that, yeah? Okay. The folk tradition of Iban weaving tells the story of Dara Ticin Temaga, the daughter of the god of war, Lang Singalang Burong, courting an ordinary man, Mangin. So this is more or less like Hercules' parents, yeah? Zeus and I forgot his mother's name actually. Okay, so the story starts with Mangin, an Iban hunter who shot a beautiful bird with his blowpipe. So as he ran to retrieve his game, what he found was a woven skirt instead of a bird. So he kept the woven skirt as he had never seen one before. As he walked back, he stumbled on Dara Tincin Tamaga. She kindly asked Mangin if he had seen a woven skirt. Mangin told Dara Tincin Tamaga about the bird he shot with his blowpipe that turned into a woven skirt. Dara Tincin Tamaga claimed her woven skirt, and soon they were married and had a son whose name is Serat Gunting. And Dara Tincin Tamaga wore a pair of baju burung jacket for Mangin and her son. She told them that if they would like to follow her home, the other world, they have to wear the jackets. When Dara Tincin Tamaga decided to return to her home, Mangin and Serat Gunting donned their jackets and accompanied her. Lang Singalang Burong posed a series of trials for Serat Gunting as he did not believe that he was his godson, but Serat Gunting passed every trial at ease. I will explain to you why I have to tell this story later. So finally, Lang Singalang Burong acknowledged Serat Gunting and taught him the rules of the custom, the adat, and also land rights of the Iban, which include the bird augitary relating to farming and also warfare, the ritual treatment of trophy heads, rituals for the dead, and all the rest of vast corpus of Iban law. And the significance of this story is basically informing us the worldview of the Iban, and the jacket that donned by Mangin and Serat Gunting is donned by the Manang or the healers until today in order to communicate with the other world. So I'm not eligible to wear those jackets, so I'll just put this piece. And this is a suspension bridge, it's called, the name. All right. So if you look at this slide, and Iban Puak Kumbu is a tie and dye, which is named Ikat method, and I'm sure most of you are familiar with Ikat method. I hope you have read what I've written there. Okay, so there are many different colors. Okay, I'll just put back. So these are all natural dye, which I will show you in the next slide later. And this is the Iban long time ago. It ended in 1923. That's when they have these warfare reconciliations where headhunting is a crime, and he would be punished, capital punishment for that. Okay, so I need to explain about a little bit of history of the Iban migration, because it will explain to you how the design abstractions and also the perceptions and interpretations of the design evolve based on the social environment. Based on written historical Iban migrations by various scholars, the Iban of Sarawak basically migrated from Kapuas River, which are located in Kalimantan, Indonesia. But those days there were no borders, it was just Borneo Island. So they basically moved to a river called, which is called Batang Lupa River. It's infested by crocodiles, during the 16th and 17th centuries. And then they move again to a place called Ulu Ai, Engkari, and also Lemana river basins. All of these rivers are infested by crocodiles. So it really shows the bravery and also a hardship of life they have to go through. Okay, so it goes the further migrational history of Ulu Ai Iban with the Baleh River or basin that is particular relevance to my research. So this is the place where I did my research for more than 10 years. I'm not a weaver, I'm not an Iban person, but I speak their languages and I have lived among them since I was young, so I embrace their culture and also their spiritual belief. So the Iban occupations of the Baleh was not entirely devoted to cultivations of rice, nor was it marked by peaceful exploitation of the forest, because according to one of the scholars, he notes that there was a sharp recrudescence of headhunting. The custom of headhunting was too deeply rooted, a part of Iban culture, for it is always to be easily abandoned, and for Iban individuals who were ambitious, eager to establish themselves as men of courage and prowess, raids on neighboring tribes and also communities were very irresistible attractions. Okay. However, as for the women, they bring with them their weaving knowledge and along the way have created new designs which have been copied among family members and other members in the community. So the designs either migrated with them or remained with members who decided to stay. Hence, it is difficult to know who created the original design unless the name of the weaver is known or that the knowledge have been kept in the families and told to the generations down the line through oral history. And that's the reason why it is very hard to find any documentations on the interpretations and also explanations of the old textiles in the past. Not until some foreign scholars come and recorded and document the meaning of some of the designs. Okay. However, there is no guarantee that these oral histories are handed down the line because it's like when you tell a story to one person, the second person will have less. So imagine after a few generations, the story becomes so simple, yeah. And the following generations is to be expected to be believers or practitioners of the old belief and customs if they would like to continue these traditions. There's a lot of taboos. There's a lot of things that the weavers need to observe in order to protect their social environment at the time they were weaving. I used to try to commission a design called Rang Juga. Rang Juga is basically a design that portrays a few flowers. They call it flowers. It's a very abstract word that actually represent the skull baskets. So the particular weaver only designed 2 head baskets in my entire 5 foot by 12 design. I was very disappointed because it didn't look like what I wanted. So I said, why only 2 baskets in the design? In that particular textile, there were 8. So she explained to me, I don't have the authority to do 8 because I come from a family who are not coming from the line of the chief of headhunters. Yeah. So those are the traditional intellectual rights that they have observed until today. So I said, what if you do not follow those kind of rules? Said, bad things will happen to me. I might get cancer. I might die. You know. So there is a kind of modern interpretations on bad things happen to them. Yeah. Okay. So in the past and also the present, life to the Iban is a continual process of balancing the existence of all beings, natural and supernatural. So all of them are required to follow the adat or customary rules and laws given by the gods to ensure that the balance of these 2 different worlds is sustained. But then the questions, they are also Christians, they are also Muslim, there are also other religions that they embrace. So how do they create this balance? It was a big question for me when I went to the village. You know, I was thinking, how can they weave, but they were embracing Christians at the same time? The video outside will answer these particular questions that I'm telling you. Yeah, it is just for me to make sure that you pay attention to the video that it took me about 6 years to create. That short video, 6 years to create, because at the time when they do the ritual to address the balance in the longhouse. Okay, there's a long story, but I cut short. Somebody have bad dreams about the longhouse, so it's a way for them to take away those negative energies is through washing the threads in the river. Okay, so you will see later. Yeah, okay. I only have half an hour. Okay, so this is the longhouse where I went. It was very, very far, but it took me 2 days to arrive there. But now you can arrive there. If you fly to Cebu, for example, from KL, you can arrive in 1.5 hours. Yeah, until 2 years ago, it was impossible to arrive in 1.5 hours. Okay, so one might wonder how all these practices that the Iban embrace align with the productions of the Puak Kumu, yeah, this textile. So the Puak Kumu serve as a canvas for documentation. It's acting as a repository of ancestral indigenous knowledge related to spiritual belief and also interpretations of those stories. So this function basically underscore the significance of this intricate textile as a testament to their worldview. Yeah? But younger generation nowadays in the villages, I found they don't understand what is going on with the textile. They call it my grandmother's hobby. Yeah, they do not know the value of this textile, and they also do not appreciate because they have been taken away from the longhouse. I mean, school is very far. They have to live in the boarding house, and they only come back like once in a fortnight. So in order to become a skillful weaver, you basically have to live your life in the longhouse to learn this. Some of them try to learn it outside of the village, but they keep coming back to the village. Yeah? So these are all the stages that you can see. The men who actually lie down next to the weaving, it is not a full textile yet. It is still in threads. But because of ikat method, it is already designed and have to go through a few different processes. I wish we have more time so I can show you all the videos so you will understand what I'm talking about. Okay, at present day, many Ibans are educated, occupy important positions at the government departments, become ministers, and work at private sectors locally or overseas. And farming is the only practice by the Ibans who still live in the longhouse. Okay. Why farming was very significant to them? Because they planted their own cotton tree, which they make thread, and they weave their cotton puakumu. And nowadays, those practices has disappeared. So most of the threads, basically they bought it from India, from China. And in the recent years, we actually introduced raw silk from Thailand, spun silk from China, and I also got them to weave some design using silk, raw silk from the worm that eats tea tree from Madagascar. But it's very rare and very expensive. Yeah. So traditionally, the Ibans were animists. And of course now, many different kind of religions comes in. And at the time when they were animists, and even until today, the puakumbu is hanged on the walls at the longhouse during various ceremonies, especially if they know that there are outsiders or foreign guests coming. They are very proud because it is their identity. It represents them as the Iban. Only the Iban actually weave the puakumbu in Sarawak. There's also their distant cousin in Kalimantan, Indonesia. But I went to Sintang and a few other places in Kalimantan, Indonesia. Compared to what the Iban has still producing now, I would say the Iban still have about 85% of continuations of this tradition. Yeah, okay. So, okay, now I'm going to go into the Iban mythology because, as I said, puakumbu is the canvas of documentation. So, the Iban mythology and religious belief. What I said has nothing to do with the slide, but this is just for your entertainment. Okay. Yeah, anyway, so in Iban mythology and religious belief, all humans were formed by Salam Pandai. Yeah? That is their god. The Iban blacksmith god who forged human beings, and if a person's illness was thought to be caused by evil spirits, a name-changing ceremony was sometimes performed along with a new tattoo near the wrist. Okay. You can see that some of these old men have tattoos on their bodies, but it's not like they were headhunters before. I asked them, where did you get this tattoo? And they said, we actually got it when we were traveling to Brunei. Brunei is another country which is north of Sarawak. And I said, have you involved in any kind of rituals? He said, no, yes, we did go through a rituals where we drink so much rice wine, and we actually dream about this tattoo that we wanted to put on our body. They were looking so serious and they laughed and he said it was just a joke. It's like any modern person, this tattoo is a decoration to our body, but we don't actually have achieved what's supposed to be achieved to obtain this statue. Yeah, so that's another story. Anyway, so all the situations that I explained to you, it basically illustrates how the Puak Kombu designs evolve and become localized in response to their new social environments. So interpretations and also diverse perspectives have been incorporated into the traditional designs. This has led to challenges regarding ownership of the design, as many families' traditional copyrighted works have become disconnected from their original family lineages. It's like when they move from one region to another region. It was actually very difficult when I wanted to put a name on a design, because there's always one core design but many varieties. And in fact, until today, the Puak Kombu, despite being very intricate and mystic, it has not been listed under UNESCO cultural heritage or whatsoever. They have been discussing it for the past 15 years. They have never come to an agreement, because they always argue about, okay, this design coming from Saribas, this design coming from Kapit, this design coming from Ankari. And one thing that I found very interesting about this design is some of these cousins basically separated during their migrations. And at one point, when I called for the master weavers from each region to come down and bring their most precious pieces, there's a lot of similarities. And some even say, I think you are my third, fourth cousin, you know. And I found out that the design of the protected traditional family's design is basically a connections that has some kind of related to the issue of kinship. You know, like, okay, she's my third cousin, she's my fourth cousin. And just by looking at the evolvement of the design, they basically knew who owns this. But they do not want to put a name on that design unless the original weaver would put a name and interpret it in the way that she wants it to be known. Yeah. So basically, my research was very difficult. I could not put any name. I always put question mark, you know, to all of those owners. Yeah. Okay. Now, how much time I have? Okay. So it's a very back-breaking work. You see that they are using backstrap loom, and before they arrive to this level, they have to go through all this other loom where they have to stretch, they have to count, and they have to tie the design on the other loom as well. And before that, they have to recount in order to make it symmetrical. Yeah, because the worst nightmare for a weaver is if their design is not symmetrical. It's always like, okay, like for example, this thing, not this thing, this textile is about 2.5+ feet. So it was actually folded 3 times. So it's easy for them to tie and dye. And the dye is done repeatedly. Like for this one, the tie and dye has been done 4 times, because they will tie first the red color here, and then if they want to make it darker, they will open and they will tie all the white color. No, white color first, they dye. This is the second one. And then the third one will be the blue. They open the red, and then it becomes darker. So 4 times dye. Yeah. Sorry. Okay, so I'm just going to speak briefly about the dye. It's all organic based from plants that can be sourced from the forest. But with the disappearance of the forest, it also meaning that the disappearance of the technique and skill and also indigenous knowledge applied to the textile. So the intricate art of Puak Kombu weaving is deeply intertwined with the land and forest. They provide a rich source of resources, dye, and essential compounds used in the dyeing process. So it's not just one plant. There's a few combinations of other plants to fix the color to the thread. Although they use lime, for example, and lime is a kind of white powder that is produced and to be made paste when they burn a special snail from the river until it's powdery, so that is to be made into paste, and they use this to fix the red color. In the past, they basically soak it in the dye for 2 or 3 months. It's the same way in India, in China, when they do the dye. Yeah. But now they speed up by heating up the plants, and they can actually produce this color within a week. Yeah, so it makes commercializations of this textile much more efficient. However, there's a negative aspect of it. It fades much faster than before. Yeah, which is bad for business actually. Yeah, okay. So the red color is the most common because this is the core color of every puak kombu ever woven before with the blue color. Yeah, they mix blue and it become very dark. In local it's called engkudu, which is Morinda citrifolia. I think you know what is mengkudu, pokok mengkudu. Yeah, okay. I don't know what's the English name. Sorry, forgot. Okay, so the blue one is Marstenia tinctoria, which is different from indigo fera, because this one the leaves are bigger and the indigo fera is smaller, and you have to ferment it. And the color comes out with a few other mixtures of plants, and it can be fixed to the thread. Again, however, it fades very fast. So I was requesting that they use the old method to ferment it in order to fix the color longer. Yeah? Now, this color is very unique because it's only found a decade ago. So it's called akar penawalanda. Locally, it is a Fibraria tinctoria, scientifically, which yields a yellow dye and thrives near the river, establishing a symbiotic relationship with other trees. So notably, what we have marked with GPS marking has gone when they started to build roads and also disrupt the river bank. So I think for now we only have 2 locations that we can find this place, which is about 1 or 2 hours walk from the longhouse. Yeah. So unfortunately, the significance of this dye producing plant, like many others, has worn due to the widespread adoption of chemical dyes in tropical region. I mean, they do still buy a lot of organic dye from Indonesia, for example, because Indonesia is more advanced in terms of producing powdered organic dye. So they tend to use that. But when they start to be open to commercializations of other dye, they do not acquire the skill to plant their own resources, and that costs money. In the beginning, it was a kind of lean management, like everything is sourced from the longhouse in the forest. So this dye basically, it started from, I think it was about 15 years ago when the master weaver accidentally dipped her towel in a bucket where this plant was stored, because it has traditional medicinal properties in treating stomach ailments, and the roots and stems of this plant have also been recognized in the useful tropical plant database for their potential in addressing dysentery, diabetes, eye disease, and stomach condition. And in fact, you also have one tree in the botanical garden in Singapore. Yeah, I check it out. Okay, so but in this longhouse, they don't use this as medicinal purposes. It was, but now it's more like for yellow dye. Yeah. So other essential forest resources include, like for example, kepayang. You will see all these materials outside in the video. I didn't put the pictures here. Okay, and a few others like jangau, for example, is a kind of mixture in the long wooden basin. It's made from ironwood that actually mix up all together with the fiber, and that actually fix and create those colors. Yeah. Okay, this picture you will see in the video outside, and please watch because it's a very important part of the weaving world. I wouldn't say weaving production, but weaving world. This is actually to, it has two different functions. One is to pacify cotton threads, and secondly is to is a ritual to do cleansing for the longhouse. A lot of foreign scholars misinterpreted this textile as the dream weaving, the dream weaver, but there's a few different types of dreams, but two have been identified to be very significant. One is a bad dream, and this ritual has to be conducted, but they can only use cotton. And the other dream is when they interpret their dreams and start to design designs on the textile. Yeah? Okay, I'm going to go to my conclusion. Do I still have? Oh, 10 more minutes. Okay, good. Okay, okay. So, okay, let me explain first about the ritual briefly. So, if there is someone, a weaver or non-weaver, have a bad dreams about the longhouse, about the populations in the house, she would consult a master weaver. Okay, but not every village, not every longhouse will be doing this, because there are some believers, there are also some non-believers. But typically, this longhouse has more than 25 weavers. Yeah, so at the time when I was there have been about 6 or 7 rituals has been done, and I said, wow, there are so many negative images that everybody see in this particular longhouse. So I managed to attend all of those rituals, and therefore I managed to create those videos. And symbolically, when on the first day, when they bring the fiber or cotton thread to the river to wet it, not even with any herbs or anything, to wet it, is actually the initial ceremony to open the doors to spirits or beings out there to participate. Yeah, not yet to cleanse, but to participate and guide the rituals. And for this master weaver, her name is Bangi Anak Mbo. He is actually a UNESCO awarded master weaver for Puak Kumbul, living treasure of Malaysia, and also the master weaver of Puak Kumbul of Malaysia. Her mother was a master weaver as well, and their weaving, beautiful weaving, is actually hung at the UNESCO headquarters in Paris. Yeah, so it's a long line of master weavers. So she, okay, based on her permission, I wouldn't share which if she would not allow me. So she has been approached by a being which she recognized as Mani. There were two superhuman female approach her who always guide her whenever she does the ritual. Yeah, and everything will go smooth. She would be like very authoritatively advise the whole populations of the longhouse. Yeah, so it's a very important ritual, because like if they do not do it, then the rest of the weavings are not going to be materialized. But there was one time, that was 2019, just before COVID. Some people have very bad dreams. They have already done the ritual, but then a group of scholars wanted her to re-perform the ritual for the participants to see. And she was praying very hard to see if Mani and Kumang would come to guide her. And I saw her crying in the kitchen. I said, why are you crying? I said, I have no guidance. How am I going to perform this ritual? Yeah. So, and I said, I don't know, you're the master weaver. So we consulted the other weavers, and that's the first time she actually staged a ritual. So she didn't say much. She just do her things, but she did not chant. She did not do anything. Yeah. So why I'm telling you this is that in a lot of part of the world, where indigenous knowledge has a lot of taboos and all these rituals is actually have a very strict guidelines. But when scholars or outsiders who wants to see it, even though it's not the season, they will be forced to stage it. And it is a sad incident for them, because it feels like she has betrayed the two guardians that always guide her. Yeah. Okay. So Okay, this is the ritual. See that the in the middle there is after everything was finished, we did a competition who arrived the river the first because we have a reward. Yeah, so the reward would be we would gain more indigenous knowledge in our head compared to the rest of the people. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I always last because I have to take photos, so I don't gain much, so I can't weave. Yeah, okay. My conclusion. Yeah, so outside the issues surrounding genetic resources or indigenous cultural property, and also the knowledge and skills necessary for producing items of this kind of material culture, yeah, were hardly being debated then. Okay, so now all these debates started to come out because of the highlights of indigenous people, indigenous knowledge in most recent years, especially when we talk about SDGs and all these kind of things, yeah. So they were largely seen as fair game for international dealers and collectors who would realize considerable profit from non-Western arts. Not to criticize, but that's the reality. Or they were seen simply as handicraft which could be adopted and transformed into commercially marketed products for the expanding tourism industry. And it's true in Sarawak. If you go to Kuching, for example, you will see all those handicraft places claim to be the original puak kumbu. But when you soak it in the water, all the colors gone and you have a gray textile left. Okay, so what I'm wearing here is based on permission. It's called, I'll show you. It's called Babuli Mulas. Babuli Mulas means the circle in the realm of the river. Yeah. So if you want to make jackets, for example, you are not allowed to wear all those figures because those are tabooed design. You can only wear natural plants, even birds. Birds like baju burung, kenyalang, for example, the hornbill, is only appropriate to be worn by male. And that's why if you see in any ceremony or how do you call it, VIP events, you only see male with the hornbills, yeah? Okay. I should stop here and leave the rest for Q&A. Yeah? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Welyne, for reminding us about how nature is actually embedded within such material culture, both in terms of materials and as well as iconography and traditions. Now, for our second presentation, we are very honored to welcome Karl Leonard from Aotearoa, New Zealand, who grew up in Rotorua and lives with his wife, Reha, and their 4 children. Karl's depth and breadth of practice and knowledge of Māori arts range from raranga, weaving, watu, and taniko, finger weaving, some examples that you see of their patterns up in the Ng Ting Fong Annual Roof Garden Commission. Listen. He also includes the kahu piu piu, waist garments and garments around the shoulders, the tuku, the lattice work, and the waka kairo carving, wood carving tradition, true to contemporary forms. These art forms have been handed down from both his maternal and paternal lineages and the elder woman of one of his local tribes. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Karl to speak about the color of the war.
Tui te tai toi, tupu te toi, ora te toi, whanaka te toi. Tapu te toi, te toi I ahu mai Hawaiki. Tui aki arangi nui tui honei tui aki a papa tūnuku a takoto a kene kārongo te pō, kārongo te ao. I te pū kōrero, I te pū wānanga, pū āwhio, nuku pū āwhio, rangi pū ātangatanga te mārama, hunuku te mārama, hurangi te mārama, takoto ana ki te pai o tū. Tūnu mea tū rāwea tū, te hinuku tū, te hirangi tū, te hi whakāwaewa ki a puta ki te whai au, ki te ao mārama e. Akāti rā kai te hau kāinga, kai te wā kāinga, kai te iwi take, koutou, te waihōtanga o tua whakarere, karanga mai, mihi mai whakatau mai rā. Whakatau mai rā, e nei, I tau mai wainganu I a koutou mai tawhiti. Whakatau mai ngā mate o te wā. Kia hora ki rongi whāriki o ngaro manga, kia kai te ki, korite, korite, korite. Ko rātau tēnā, e whakatātari mai nei i te kahu o te pō, ko tātou, te kanoho i oro o rātau mā tēnā tātou. Tēnā tātou i rungi i tēnei kaupapa nui whakaharahara i whakakotahi ai a tātou i tēnei wā. Kei aku rangatira, e aku nui, tēnā koutou, a tēnā tātou katoa. You're probably wondering what I was talking about. It's Māori practice actually, whenever we enter a new space, a space that we're not used to or we haven't been before, we pay tribute to our creators. We pay tribute to those who first walked this land. We pay tribute to those who are present in front of us, but we especially pay tribute to those who contributed towards us, and those are the dead. So we pay tribute to them because we are the culmination of everything that they've put together. And so I not only greet those of mine that have passed on, but I greet yours as well, because as we join in a physical force, they're up there joining in a spiritual force as well. And for us, it's very important to lay that platform out before we actually launch into something that's new. Kia ora. So my name is Karl Leonard. I have to say, how do you summarize a culture, a people who've come from Southeast Asia as well as South America, migrated their way into Polynesia, become a water-based people? They migrated to the furthest point south that they could get to, which is Aotearoa, New Zealand, lived there for 1,000 years and changed from water culture to land-based culture in 30 minutes. I think that's pretty impossible. But what I hope to do is actually give you a glimpse into part of our world, part of my world growing up, part of the world of my children, so that it gives you a good idea of what shapes us and makes us what we are. And basically, when you see me, you see our culture, you see our people and our behaviours. Everyone has a behaviour. And every culture has a behaviour that guides us and leads us in what we do. So I'm going to talk to you primarily about our textile arts, although, it's pretty difficult just to focus on one part. I'm not a full-time weaver. I'm not a full-time artist. Art is very important to me, but it is in one important segment of my life. It's like you cannot talk about the hands, the feet, the brain, and other parts of the body unless you identify and talk about the heart. So everything is overlapped. And they have some commonalities, they have some specialities. I think the Western world teaches us to focus in on just one part, but without all the parts, they don't really work together. So Tānikotia te ao. So when you look at me, these are the people you're actually looking at. That's me right in the centre. Directly above me is my father. To his left-hand side is my paternal side. So you can see his father sitting there on the chair. His name is Heketoro Whakauehi Kairo. His mother is up there in the corner, the top right-hand corner. His wife is the one holding the club. These are my grandparents. So my grandmother, who I grew up with, the lady holding the club, she was born in 1872. And so of all her grandchildren, I'm the youngest. She lived with us until she was 105, and she passed away at 112, an avid smoker to the very end, as well as a person who loves sugar and everything else that she shouldn't have. So you can see my father directly above me, and these are his siblings below and to the right-hand side. And the reason I feature them is because my grandmother was a prolific weaver. Right up until she was weaving up to 100 years in age, probably maybe to about 103. My uncle, the gentleman with glasses, he was a carver, so he carved basically up to the end as well. And longevity in my family line comes from my grandmother's side. To the right-hand side there, that's my mother's side, that's my maternal side, so that's my grandmother. She was also another weaver. Down below me, the photograph in the bottom shows my mother, who's seated next to her brother, another carver. And my auntie at the same time, directly above my mother, is another weaver. So the traditions of weaving and carving usually are passed from father to son, mother to daughter, auntie to niece, uncle to nephew. They are contained in family lines. We don't usually pass outside the lines because you don't want everybody else to look like you. Some things are quite particular to individual families. And so it wasn't an unusual practice, and especially in the art of weaving. If you saw another good weaver, and especially if they were a master weaver from another area, if they walked into the room, it wasn't unusual for someone to throw their blanket over their weaving so that you wouldn't steal their ideas or their style of weaving. So when we're talking about styles of weaving, we're actually talking about individuals, individual families. And sometimes when you bring certain lines together, you can actually bring certain designs together as well. So this is my father's side, the side of carving. This is my mother's side, her side of carving as well. So you can see in this photograph, even my first and last carving. The painted one is my first carving, 6 foot, 2 meters in height, and the one I'm holding there when I was still fairly young was the last. I wouldn't call myself a carver, although I know the carving practice. To me, someone who continues the art continually is a practitioner. If you stop, well, you might have been a great swimmer in your young days, but now that you've moved to 60, the swim is a lot slower. My grandmother, however, was a prolific weaver, as I mentioned, right up until she reached 102, and these are some examples of her work. There's a basket that you see to the bottom left-hand side, which was the third basket that I created. And the reason I feature it here is because I went to see her. She was 112 at the time. She saw my basket and she said, "Ho mai tō kete," which means, "Give me your basket." She looked inside and outside and she says, "Oh, te hatahua. Engari, he ririki I konei, kare roa, ka motu." Which means, beautiful basket, but it's too fine here and it won't be long before it breaks. So, you know, it's pretty outstanding to be critiqued by a 112-year-old. Beyond my grandmother, these are some of the ladies who taught me their individual techniques. So I was fairly young at the time, and the passing of knowledge is something to be jealously guarded. You do not, and they did not just hand it out. You could give basic information, and there's specific information. So these ladies that I'm standing and sitting with, they knew my grandmother, who is a fairly high-ranking woman during her time, both my grandmother and grandfather, actually high-ranking on both sides. So they understand the hierarchical part of our society. The second thing is that they did like my uncle. They thought he was, a very good man, knew his practices. They also knew my aunties as weavers. My sister had also married into this particular clan because we still have clan systems over there. And so these are all things that allow you to sit at the table. It does not gain you automatic right. Even being of aristocracy lines does not guarantee you anything. It just allows you to be present at the table. So they obviously liked my family, and so as I mentioned, they actually taught me some of their particular techniques in weaving. So even the lady that you see at the top left-hand side, she said, hara mai koe, noho mai koe I konei. You come and sit over here. E ki te koe I wā rātou mahi, you see what they're doing over there? Yes. Says, kau e whai atu, me pēnei ke koe. Which means, don't you follow what, you see what they're doing over there? Don't you do it like that, you do it like this. But don't you go and tell them, because if you tell them, I know you told them, and I will come and find you. So that's how knowledge would be transferred, regardless whether it was male or female. And I've got to say, with a lot of our traditional weaving and carving roles, the roles are actually, I think they're complementary. In times of abundance, you can actually have practices for each part of the society. But as things dwindle down and there are only a few of you left, you find that you are stretched and you have to practice almost everything. And what I mean, like, for example, if we took crayfish, in abundance, you can eat just the tails because there's a lot of them. But when you come down to the very last few, you have to eat every part of it. And so when you look at some of us, we are the last part of it, which means we have to make sure that we cover all bases. Whereas traditionally, some groups could take care of different parts. And my wife is going, speed it up. So these are some examples of the different types of weaving that I do weave. My original passion and love was actually weaving baskets using the flax leaf. However, some of those ladies that you saw, they actually got me into the practice of weaving the skirt that you see myself and my nephews wearing, which we call a piu-piu. It's commonly identified as Māori. It is actually post-European. Its concepts originate out of traditional clothing, but the garment is not traditional. So when we have Māori performances today, Māori dancing, these are the type of garments that you will see us wear. We identify with it automatically, and we use it to indicate ourselves as a particular race of people amongst all the different races. So my aunties introduced me into this form of weaving, and I hated it with a passion. It was the worst thing that I hate in all our weaving forms. The other weaving form is the basket that you see to the left-hand side, which we call Tānikotia. So the art form I love the most is the least that I do, and the ones I hated the most are what have taught me patience. So I guess we get led in certain directions to ensure that, one, we master certain forms, and two, to help shape our characters. You can see two individuals down the bottom wearing one of our waist garments. It can be worn around the waist, a waist mat, as well as on the shoulders as well. The garment you see my niece wearing is what we call a kahu piu-piu. Piu-piu is the basic skirt. Kahu just means a garment. In the early 1900s, our people started producing this garment, one, because it takes about a good 3 months to create. Traditional clothing or capes or cloaks from shoulder to the ankle can take you anywhere from 1 to 5 years. So this development came about because of simply time. And it is the garment that we most identify with today. You won't often see the woven waistband on this type of garment, so this is a fusion between those traditional long capes and the modern garment. You can see that artists today are more often very selfish people, as in we sit alone, we focus on our art. Our traditional weaving, though, was part of the family art, and you can see my daughter, who was 2 at the time, she had no choice but to be part of it. As you're rocking them to sleep, you're weaving at the same time, and she's now 18 years old. So that's her at the age of 2. Different types of garments are requested by different whānau using that piu-piu style. But once again, it takes a good 3 months just to make one. And those are all natural vegetable dyes. They are all made from the same plant. And I will get to that a little bit later. You'll see the type of plant that we use. So there's the example of that waist mat. That is all natural fibre. All the fibre's been spun on the bare leg. We do not use needles or looms. It's all woven in the hand. A thing about the designs or patterns. So those ladies that I showed you earlier, today we have a practice where people will sit and actually graph out the designs. But those old ladies said that once you get it set up here, you go from the mind straight to what you're weaving. There is no graft in between. So it's just a straight transmission from mind to being woven and created. This is a practice that you'll also see today, which is very popular in our dancing, which we call poi. These poi are all made from fibres that I've created myself, dyed myself, spun on my own legs. So we don't have a spinning wheel either. We spin between the hand and the bare leg. The black dye is peat, decayed vegetation from our swamps. We use our natural tree dyes as tannins, mordants to fix the black mud. You can see the sort of orangey brown rusty colour, that is red ochre clay. The white is a natural fibre. We sometimes come up with a sort of a terracotta red, but our colours are very basic. And I think it's good having basic colours because it means that you have to have good eye coordination of simple colours and to make them sit and work well together. The one you see in the top left-hand side was the very first one that I wove. I didn't weave it out of passion. No passion there whatsoever. I wove it because somebody told me I couldn't do it. I'd been invited to an exhibition and the head weaver of the time said, we'd like you to weave something. However, in this day and age, there's always a certain group of people who will try and marginalise everyone else and make sure that it's only their selected group of people that actually get to weave. So this is not about passion. This is about being told, you can't do it. So the first poi is what actually gave birth to the rest of the poi to come. So you can see that that was in 2005, and these are the very first 4 of them. If you look at the design carefully, you can notice those 2 triangle designs, and when they sit just in the middle where you see 2 of them, they look like little eyes, and it's deliberate. It's what we call karuatua, or the eyes of the beings. In other words, when we swing this ball around and we're singing, we use it in prayer, and sometimes it's to keep and ward off things around you. Other times it's to send things out to certain individuals you may not be that happy with. So there you see the first 8. Now the very 8th you see is the triangular one. Now I got to a certain point with these designs and my wife said, can't you do anything but round? And there we go, there's another challenge again. So I thought, she said, diamond or something like that. And I thought, well, yeah, I suppose a diamond is a girl's best friend, so let's try diamond. So it was just a matter of just weaving that. No plain design, but just taking the design from the head and still focusing on that one particular design that I like, which is karuatua, which are the eyes of the unseen gods. Now, just an interesting point of this. Now, we've talked about, I think it was mentioned earlier about the feminism in weaving. When I came to the first 8 poi, which is the 8th one, we had a fairly well-known Māori woman who saw these pieces in exhibition. And she was part of our arts, the arts programs across in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And she looked at them and she said, I don't know, they look rather manly to me. And I sort of looked at them and thought, what says that they're manly? I don't think there's anything manly about them. So you see, traditionally men and women would weave the same designs. What sets weavers apart traditionally is not just the some people have learned their practice so that they how taua kupu mo te practice. It's when you know an art form so well, you can do the art form, but there's always something missing. Te kupu Pākehā. I'm asking my wife, I said, well, now what's the English term? Okay, let me give you an example. We were across in Tahiti recently and we were talking with some of our Tahitian cousins and they were talking about their style of dance. And we know their style of dance. We don't dance like them. And they said, well, people who aren't our people, aren't born and live there, do learn the practice of their dance and they can actually achieve an excellent standard. But there's always just something missing. And it's the X factor or what we call wairua or the spirit in it that's just not quite present. In other words, you can replicate it perfectly, but there's always something just missing. And so when she mentioned that
this is male, or, this looks rather manly. I thought, well, no, I don't actually believe in that. We don't actually have that. I think what she judged me on was the European thought of what's male role and what's female role. I think Western style believes that males shouldn't weave, and that's not really what happens in Māori practice. We have crossovers. Generally women may weave, generally men may carve, but there are always those who cross over. So just to answer her, I started to weave this one. Now, those are my fingers you can see there. I've got fairly big hands. These are the hands of my grandmother. Her hands, she had big hands. She was a very strong woman. At the age of 5, she picked me up with one hand and lifted me off the ground by the leg. That's 97-year-old. So these are her big hands. But you can see the threads by my thumb, and so these are all spun individually, dyed using natural dyes. In fact, when I was weaving this, some people couldn't see the threads. They thought I was working with cottons, but these are all individually prepared by myself, using natural tree dyes. And even there, we have practices of how to extract, how we have to look after the plants. We can't just go and we can only take small segments. It's the survival of the plant that's important as well. And then to take them, we have to pray as well, certain prayers. So it's not just going in and taking as we want. And so that poi that you see there in my hand, it looks a little bit like a fox, I guess. You can see the 2 beady eyes on either side, a little point in the middle. So that was the 9th poi. The one you see to its right-hand side is about the 13th. The 13th one was actually born in the US of A with our indigenous cousins over there, the Anishinaabe. And so it was actually born in their ceremonies. And I tend to think that, and I think most of you, if you're a parent, will understand this, we have aspirations for our children, but as they grow, they take on certain personalities. So too will you find when you weave. Your intention and the end product can sometimes be 2 different things. So all I planned for that poi that you see on the right-hand side is on a napkin, on the plane, I drew a diamond. And in the middle of the diamond, I put a star. That was the blueprint. Stars aren't our designs. We don't actually have star symbols traditionally, and I knew that it's a symbol used by them. So because it was born in the US of A amongst them, I thought it was appropriate to use a design that signified that. And so a lot of things actually happened with the creation of that poi. And it was an exchange between myself and another artist. He tattooed me from from the shoulders down to my knees. And so it was an exchange. And so that poi would have taken easily 4 months to create from start to finish. There's a lot of madness in there and a lot of late hours. All natural dyes. Some parts in there, the very final parts, stones from the US of A, from different reservations, right through to the eagle feathers at the end. But those are a lot of tangent stories that'll take longer than 30 minutes to tell you about. But you can see that each component of the poi, there's something different about it. There's some little different part of a design. A garment that gives you a better idea of where the idea of the dancing skirt comes from. So on the outside of traditional clothing, there were tubes, which are protection against rain as well as decoration. That one in particular was started in 1989, left for many years and not concluded until 2017 when I was commissioned to weave a piece for a wedding. I ran out of time. New Year's Day I was lying in bed, troubled about it, and then a voice just pops in the head and says, go to this particular suitcase, open it up, pull that piece out and finish it. So from 1989 is when I started, 2017 is when I finished it. And when I asked the elder who had commissioned me to make this for her granddaughter, I said, now the two are getting married. They wouldn't have been born in 1989 by chance, would they? She says, yes, they were. I says, wow, there you go. Both the garment and the recipients were born in the same year. A piece for one of our national, I guess you'd call him an expert in the Māori language. No, I don't guess. He's actually he's godlike. Speaks so many different languages, very articulate in both English and Māori, and would probably growl at some of my English. Hang on. Anyway, here's what we call the flax factory. So because, you have to have your own family to make sure that the practice is continued on, and plus they have to do it with, they have no choice. They're born into it. So she was once 2 years old. She's in the bottom left-hand corner, and there's her brother to the top right-hand corner, having finished his first small food container. And you can see my son, the number 2, is so enthralled with the work he's doing. You can see his passion for the art. And the funniest thing I would say is that so many people say to them, "You're so lucky. You're so lucky." Oh, all that knowledge, the intergenerational transfer. It says it on his face. So they learn the practices, and I think the thing about it, no different than what I learned with my grandmother, I guess, is that it's not until you're older you actually see the value in what you've learned. His older brother, who's now 22, sitting in the front, said to me, "Dad, when I get a real job, I don't have to do any of this, do I?" I says, "Wow, it's like this. When you walk through the door and you see us working and we're working on flax, you will sit down and come and help us. If you do not, I will miss you dearly. I love you with all my heart, but feel free to move on. Because the practice of this house is when you see someone working, you will come and help." And the good thing about involving your own children in these practices is that they have to learn to work together. You can work with other people, but to work with your own siblings is probably the most difficult thing ever. So it teaches you patience, not only with the art, but with one another. And hopefully that's how they will be in life, with one another. So that's them when they were younger. You can see the young son who rolled his eyes. He's now in the middle there with his sister. In fact, he has such a sharp eye, and he is quite particular about the art, that he spotted a mistake that I made in the panel right behind him and says, "Pop, you mucked up on this one." Because I was just slightly out. So, that's a good sign that the next generation actually is picking up and they're doing a better job than you. But we're quite heavily involved, not only in teaching our children, but it's ensuring that these practices are alive in our communities. So we belong to different clans where we will go and help and teach them these practices. It's the hands-on that's really important to ensure that it's meaningful and it's alive. And so this is another clan, again, that we're helping to renovate their traditional, I guess you would call it a longhouse, by creating these panels. And just to give you an idea of just 2 types of traditional garments, you can see my daughter sitting, giving those wonderful eyes to the left, and she's wearing her great-grandmother's cloak, the grandmother that I grew up with. And so the cloak she's wearing is probably was created about 1900 to 1910 by my grandmother. So that has the kiwi feathers on the outside, and the other one is a simple tasseled cape. Now we go out and we help practices amongst our different communities. One that we've become involved in is to create a new practice using old practices. Traditionally, we did not bury our dead in the system that we use today, and especially not in mats like this. This is our answer to the Western practice of using a coffin, so that we're using something that's biodegradable, but more so that we can use all our practices traditionally and imbue them into this one. So this is about teaching our people how to care for our dead, which is not only just the weaving practice. This means incantations and prayers, how you treat the dead from start right through to finish. Somebody did ask me, do you think we'll ever get back to the stage of actually burying people, how we would bind them and make them sit up. And I said, well, at this present time, it is too confronting for too many of our people. They're too used to a coffin. I said, but perhaps in my time when I go, there might be, but perhaps one day we'll go back to the exhuming and washing bones. Because Western style of burial is, land is not endless, and it's just about making the best and caring for the land as best as possible. So I'm just going to flick through some of these. These are some of the areas where we've actually been to teach people, different clans. We don't usually do this before a person dies, but in order to teach the clan, you have to do it now while they're living. Because our old people would say that if you wove it, you just might be calling death onto your doorstep. So we teach them different prayers by which to avert things, as well as to be able to practice this. So I can happily say that all the volunteers, they're still alive. The chants aren't just male, the chants are also female. We play complementary roles, both do the chants. So it's just not men. So these are some of our different clans once again, different areas that we've gone into to actually teach them the practice. That's my son there. You can see they're very happy once again because he probably only had 2 hours sleep before going to school. That's the one in the bottom left-hand corner. And I used the other son, the oldest one, to size. But I said to them, now when I go, you know how to do it. So this is about teaching them all. Now I can actually say that this clan here in particular on the east coast of New Zealand, they are actively involved in doing this, having taught them. So, you know, you couldn't ask for better than that the practice is alive and living. This one in particular is one of the aunts who taught me. In those earlier photos, their family decided to move her from public cemetery to a private Māori cemetery. So they asked me if I'd actually weave the mats for her. And so this has gone from exhuming to wrapping her and then taking her to the next area. And there you go. There's the team in 2020. Now, you can see they're much younger here, but this is just to show you the plant that everything that I've been talking to you about comes from this plant you see growing in my backyard. That is not enough to do the work that we do. In fact, it probably would only be about a week's worth of work. So that's about cultivating it, ensure that it grows good. You have to grade it. But all the fibre used for weaving comes from this plant called New Zealand flax. So these are different cultivars growing. That area you see there is like, I guess, maybe 3 to 5 stadiums worth of flax that we've gone through from the start right through the end. It grows in the swamp. It belongs to my cousins. So I've been given permission to go in there and extract it. We have certain practices of how to dispose with what's not used, all within the same place, so that it continues a cycle. And these are just the different stages, so from being stripped to marked, from marked to being scraped, from scraping with a mussel shell to actually spinning the fibre on your bare leg. And then, as you can see, the flax factory are hard at work. Once you've actually prepared the strands, we actually have to boil them. So the purpose of boiling is to remove the chlorophyll from them so that they'll turn to a cream colour. So we do this because in our natural hot springs, at all sorts of hours, so the one that you see that is black is probably boiling flax at 3 or 4 in the morning because we have a time schedule to keep to. Once you let the strands dry, then probably the most amazing thing I think that most people is that they curl into tubes. And that's why people often think that they're bamboo or something. But we have to separate each of those strands individually so they don't clump or curl into one another. Then it goes through different stages of weaving those strands together, weaving the waistband, then weaving the handles onto them. And now my son has taken over that process because he's fussier than myself and my wife and does a better job than both of us. Of the 4 children, he's probably the fussiest. Just some of the stages. That's a number of skirts being put together. Vegetable dye. So this is one of our tannin dyes, the modern fixer. Without this, our skirts won't go black. And this dye is also used to neutralise the last dye that we do use. You can see it's been placed into the dye. So the dye, the black dye that you see there has been gathered from our swamps. We bring it back home and immerse our skirts into it. So the brown colour you see there actually fixes the black. So it's submerged totally into the mud for 2 to 3 hours, taken out, put through a series of rinses of that tree dye, the tannin dye, to come up with the cream and black. The thing about the tree dye is that without putting it back into that same dye, it won't neutralise as much as possible the peat. Peat is acidic. So over 100 years, you'll find the skirt will disintegrate. So without putting it back into the dye to neutralise the peat as much as possible, they'll eventually start falling apart or degrade much faster. You think it's all over? No, we have to take the skirt, we have to go and rinse it off in our natural streams. You can see the natural blue of the water. So it's fresh water, and these are our tribal streams. We have 2 in particular that I use. So we're very fortunate, they're freshwater streams. Done at all sorts of hours. Can be 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, because somebody has to wear that skirt. And that gives you an idea of the different patterns. Drying them. Then you think, yes, once they're dried, that's finished. No, we have to size them. And all those markings you see on those waistbands tell people what size they're wearing. Somebody doesn't realise they're not Cinderella anymore. They try and go for the small ones. And then when you think that's finished, no, you still have to go through one final time and actually trim them just to make sure that there's no loose threads, otherwise they'll start ripping apart. And there you go, there's my daughter with 50 of them laid out on the ground, ready to go to a particular clan or dancing group. Some of the designs that we've done over the years. The lady you see there is probably back in the 1920s. I've forgotten her name. Her skirt is probably one of the most that's impressed me on its shape, its design, its how it falls on the form, the fineness of the cuts, as well as the one just down below. Not all traditional weavers impress me. You can see with some of these designs, some people will think, wow, just the designs of them are really cool, they're great designs. But according to those aunts, if it didn't complement your form, then it wasn't a good design. So while aesthetically they look good on a wall, that's what they are good for, a wall hanging. If they don't look good on your form, they're not good at all. So you can see that with some of those ladies there, we now have this trend of having more black down the bottom, black up the top. But what it does is it shortens the person and makes them shorter and wider. Who wants to look shorter and wider? And so, you know, if you look at some of these ladies on either side of them, they're the same size, but just how the colour placement goes, it really does, you know, clothes maketh the woman or man. So those are the best, and these are some of the worst. I mean, when I look at those ladies down below, and I've got to blame my clan for this design down the bottom, she's actually a niece of mine who instigated this. And when I look at the ladies wearing them, I think, my God, you ladies look so short, and it makes you look so wide. And then you see the men above. Yes, now some of our people have gone back to wearing what I call the clan G-string. And we did have a form of G-string, but it was well made. These, I think someone was playing to the idea of making us look like the savage caveman. And because we now see this in dancing, our kids think this is traditional, and it's not. And those are my two pet hates. If I have a pet hate, it would be the G-string look of the caveman and the skirt that makes ladies look short. And just an example is there. The one you see on the left-hand side, this is my niece. She's a big girl. But the design on the left was the one worn by my father's clan, and I tried to convince them just to reduce the cuts, the number of cuts in it, just by maybe 4, and to deepen the diamond and shrink the width of it. Because I said to them, it just makes you look wide. And you can see the difference with my niece wearing that. And not all our relatives have good common sense. But anyway, here's the flax factory. It's not a very good photo, but it is one taken recently, about 2 weeks ago. My wife said I had to put a good one of them in. Oh, well, a recent one anyway. Not so good, but it was, and that was us across in Tahiti performing traditional rituals on their marae. So we originate from this island of Raiatea across in Tahiti 1,000 years ago. And we like to make a pilgrimage back down there. So that's it. Am I in time? Okay.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again, Karl, for reminding us about how knowledge is produced and also like passed down through generations. Also speaking about the slippages that we talk about, gendered notions of labor that go behind Indigenous traditions. For the last presentation for this afternoon, I'm very honored to present Wafa Ghnaim. Wafa Ghnaim is a Palestinian dress historian, researcher, author, and educator who learned embroidery from her mother, award-winning artist Freya Abazi Ghnaim. In 2017, she founded the Tātris Institute. Tātris and T, I think you can see a copy of this book outside at the table. A global arts education initiative teaching Palestinian, Jordanian, and Syrian embroidery techniques and dress history. Wafa is the curator for the Museum of Palestinian People in Washington, D.C., and is a senior research fellow at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art. For this afternoon, she will be presenting the timeless Thob, Land, Heritage, Culture in Palestinian Dress. So please join me in welcoming her.
It's very nice to talk to you all. I have some notes here today. I hope you don't mind me following them a little bit because I know we've got limited time. But as a Palestinian dress historian and a researcher, my work is really based on not only the practice of embroidery and dressmaking and sort of keeping this art form alive in this generation, but also it's making, but it's also looking and teaching my community that is based in diaspora and in exile in the United States how to look at our dresses, how to understand our dresses, because in the absence of being in our land, being away from our homeland, in many cases not allowed to return to our homeland, we are connecting with our cultural inheritance from afar. And this tradition of Palestinian embroidery and of dressmaking is one way that we can connect with the very few aspects of inheritance we have in the diaspora. And in terms of Palestinian embroidery specifically, which I'm speaking about today, I want to explain to you that, I am going to explain a little bit about the history of Palestinian embroidery and dress, but I also want to share a little bit of my critique and observation about how Palestinian dress is represented and preserved in the United States. In many cases, it's been very inauthentic. And when you view this form of intangible cultural heritage, Palestinian embroidery was inscribed as an intangible cultural heritage in 2021 by UNESCO. And to have this intangible cultural heritage, to access it from diaspora, and to have a country that is not your homeland representing your culture to you in inauthentic and disingenuous ways, it causes cultural erasure. And so a lot of my work is in educating my community about making, looking, and how to enrich our understanding through the ceremony of tātaris, the ceremony of practicing our embroidery through oral history, storytelling, and a cup of tea. So I learned tātaris, which is the Arabic word for embroidery. I learned tātaris from my mother, Wafa Ghnaim, and that's me there. I was always a very good helper. Growing up in the United States, we were often put in situations where we were presenting our art form as a folk art to Americans through festivals and answering questions about who we were and what we represented. And at a very, very young age, I was exposed to the types of questioning and connotation, social and political connotation that comes with being Palestinian. As a young girl, I just understood tātaris to be the handwork of my mother and my grandmother. I had no idea until I started sitting in these festivals and helping my mother what that connotation was and what it meant. And this strongly impacted and influenced the way that I sort of found my own voice in representing my own identity through this art form. My mother was born in Safad, Palestine, before 1948. It's in the northern part, and it was depopulated in 1948. At that time, my mother was 2 years old. So to think I learned tātaris from my mother at 2 years old in diaspora. My mother was exiled at 2 years old from Palestine to Syria. And she grew up in Syria, and she learned embroidery in diaspora, in exile. And she actually studied at Damascus University and learned art and history. So she received 2 different degrees. They didn't have art history there. I mention this because even these divisions, these nation-state divisions of like what's Palestinian and what's Syrian and what's Jordanian, are very artificial to us, because in the north of Palestine, this was divided in 1916 into 4 different countries, this one region. And this one region had where my mother's from in northern Palestine, which is, southern Syria, southern Lebanon, northern Jordan. This was a style of dress that was divided into 4 countries. And now, our identity is stuck in deciding, which identity we most align with. But really, we're from this particular village and region on the map. So I began learning from my mother, and I sort of didn't just learn how to practice tātaris from my mother. I also learned how to teach tātaris from her as well, because she had us not only sitting in these festivals, but in her classes and in her lectures, and I got to sort of see her methodology and how she was preserving the art form in diaspora. I began teaching tātaris after my first book was released, which is outside on the table, Tātaris and Tea. And I didn't realize until I released that book, which is really an oral history documentation. It's meant to share the ritual of practicing tātaris, how not only like the actual technique of cross stitch or various types of embroidery stitches we do, it was meant to preserve the storytelling that came along with our embroidery, with the patterns, the meanings of the patterns, the familial stories. So there was also sort of this like historical context to the symbols that we were stitching that had particular meanings in different points of time. But then my mother also infused her own stories into, her memories when she was stitching certain dresses. And then, of course, I discovered while I was writing Tātaris and Tea that I had some of my own stories too, some of my own memories that I had when I was stitching those patterns as well. Even in this image, you can see my mother on the left-hand side, and she's wearing the same thob. I mean, this is a thob that she created. A thob means dress in Arabic. And I'm wearing the same thob in a lecture on the right. So even in our teaching, our business uniform, where I'm wearing, the same, thob that my mother passed on to me. And it really sort of symbolizes also this intergenerational component that's so inextricably linked to this art form and the preservation of this art form, not as necessarily only an artistry or a craft, but truly as a ceremony that's enlightened by storytelling, by the practice and the making of our hands, by engaging in the muscle memory of our hands in exile when we cannot at times access our elders, and then of course the ritual of tea. And I don't know if anyone here stitches or has a tradition of stitching in your family. Actually, I'm sure many of you do. But you might notice that when you're all sitting together stitching, you're not looking at each other. So you get a little bit more courage to share some of the stories you have on your mind. Share a joke, have some humor in something that maybe is a little bold, So I've heard a lot of things in the stitching circles with my aunties that I will not repeat. But it gives you this openness, to being together. And I think that's the beauty of Tātaris as a ceremony. Before 1948, before the creation of the State of Israel, before we were exiled from our homeland, Tātaris was traditionally passed from mother to daughter, from grandmother to granddaughter. But in the wake of al-Nakba is what we call 1948, which is the catastrophe. That's what it means. The centuries-old tradition of Tātaris was severely disrupted because different maternal lineages, families, generations were traumatized by war and displacement, and many didn't have any more access to the materials, the threads, even the dresses, their wedding dresses, their thobs that they inherited from their mothers and grandmothers that they locked in their closet before they fled the war, only to find that they could never return. So there was so much loss in al-Nakba, and now not just al-Nakba as a singular event in 1948, but now an ongoing event of dispossession that's been going on for 76 years. And this isn't just land dispossession. We're now talking about cultural dispossession. And so much of what I'm doing when I'm teaching and when we're practicing Tātaris and when I'm sharing some of these sort of findings I have when I'm looking through these collections in the United States, what I'm doing isn't just preserving culture. I'm preventing cultural erasure. And the obscurity that these museums insert into our intangible cultural heritage is something that must be corrected on their archival records, but should also be communicated to our community before damage is done long term, because we in many cases don't even, I've met many Palestinians in exile who have never even touched one of our dresses. They've only seen them in the books. So for them to see one of our dresses in a museum and to think it's an authentic reflection of their heritage can be dangerous. The museum then carries a lot of authority. So that's what I hope to do in my work. But growing up with a Palestinian mother and an embroiderer and a 1948 refugee, I spent a lot of time embroidering her stitches. And this image is from the Gardens Thob. The Gardens Thob was a Thob that my mother did the majority of the stitching. But when me and my two sisters were younger, we helped her. So she had tasked us with stitching small flowers all over the Thob. We learned menagel stitch, which is this connecting, you see the stripe here on the bottom. This is a connecting stitch that connects two panels of fabric. We practiced our menagel, we practiced our cross stitch. These are all different types of tatris that we practice in our culture. But one thing you'll see here is that on the left-hand side of the screen is the back of her stitches, and on the right side is the front of her stitches. So one of the main sort of virtues of tatris is to stitch with cleanliness and neatness. It's a reflection of your own standard of perfection and cleanliness. Yes, it's true. And when you're stitching, when I teach, students how to stitch, I do pick up their a cloth, and I look immediately on the back, and there's a sort of sense of anxiety, but that's good. They should feel, because I will be gentle in my feedback delivery, but not like our tetas, our grandmothers, our elders. They'll go straight to it. So I'm trying to get them acclimated to it, but this is the standard I'm talking about. This is a level of mastery where you can see such strategy in technique and in not sort of jumping from one stitch to the other on the back. A large part of why this is so important is because we view thread as a resource, as that you shouldn't waste. It's a precious resource that you shouldn't waste. And so you want to, but also this is worn on the body. This isn't embroidery to be hung on a wall. This is to be worn on the body. And if your dress is completely, covered in embroidery and you have all this extra thread on the back, that just adds to the weight of the garment. It makes it unusable. So in sort of working with my mother and really being an apprentice to her work and a witness to her work, and in some cases a studio assistant to her, I admired her stitches. I studied her stitches. I understood her stitches. And that's what led me, thousands of stitches later, that's what led me to kind of have an appreciation and an interest and a curiosity in learning about other mothers' stitches, other Palestinian mothers who have stitched their dresses, and now we no longer know who they are. They are makers unknown. They were makers once known, and now someone's decided that they are nameless on the record of the dress that's in these museums. But just to give you a little context, until 1948 and Al-Nakba, Palestinian dress reflected an individual or a place, a wife, a mother, a daughter, a family, a house, a village, a town, a field, a market. The thob itself, the dress, is a visual representation of the owner's life. The threads, the colors she chose, as well as the patterns she used to tell her story in stitches. There were three main segments of society before 1948 in Palestine. We had villagers, or fallahin, and they were people of the land. They were farmers, and they were the majority of the population. We also had city people, I guess kind of like us, we're like city people. And then we also have Bedu, or like the nomadic, the tribal people. And each segment of society had their own needs in embroidery in their dress in terms of symbolism. They had their own beliefs. Additionally, the dress was also divided by region. So each village, so let's say Safad, for instance, where my mother's from. Safad had a city, so there was a city style in Safad. And then there were Bedu, nomadic people around the Galilee. They had their own style. And their styles were different than, like, let's say, the nomadic or the city people in other villages. So each style that you see here on the screen are all representative of different styles that were worn by region. And one of the greatest misunderstandings of Palestinian dress is that it reflected a religious identity, because there's so much discussion of Palestine as a holy land, as a biblical place with a biblical past. But there were very real people that were indigenous to this land that did not find it to be a value to represent their religion on their dress. This was not a concept that was necessarily important to them. We had not only Christians, Muslims, and Jews, we had Zoroastrians, Druze, we had ethno-religious minorities like Armenians, we had Baha'i people of Baha'i faith. We have many different religious and ethno-religious communities historic to Palestine before 1948. And we, maybe in some cases you would find a certain type of headdress worn for a certain community, but overall, the majority of, in terms of meaning and symbolism of our dress before 1948 was indicative of a regional identity. Where are you from? What land are you from? And even today, in diaspora, in exile, the first question you ask another Palestinian, where are you from? Where in Palestine are you from? This is the most important part to us. We don't divide by religion, and so I think that's very important to know. And so that sort of brings me into some of my research, and I see I only have 12 minutes, so I'm going to move as quickly as I can. I began studying the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection. I'm going to use that as an example here because one thing that really opened my eyes when I visited that collection was the lack of proper geographic understanding and identification of the dresses. They were all kind of viewed as either, generally Palestinian or Syrian. But they weren't identified by village or region or anything like that. Another really interesting part of that collection is that they were predominantly from Bethlehem. And to me, that was fascinating because this is a part of sort of this Holy Land phenomenon. So if you look at why did Bethlehem dresses end up in the United States? The one thing you're going to find, or that I found initially in my research, was that in the late 19th century, you see quite a bit of advertisement happening about tourism to the Holy Land and visiting the Holy Land. And of course, one of the main stops is Bethlehem. So many North American museums have either a Bethlehem dress or a majority of their collection are Bethlehem dresses. And this, to me, was particularly unique. The other point I wanted to make here is that the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection it was part of the Costume Institute before it was transferred to the curatorial departments, which I know sounds like a lot of administrative stuff for this group. But what's really important about that is that originally the Costume Institute was the Museum of Costume Art. The Museum of Costume Art at the Met was intending, in its inception, as a part of the Met in the early 20th century, was to be a source inspiration for fashion designers and costume designers of New York theaters. And the collections of the Museum of Costume Art were used as source material so that costume designers can come and sort of come up with, in the case of Palestinian dress, more authentic replicas of biblical costume. So that made me question what dress in this collection, but in any collection in the United States, was intended on theatrical performance, and which of it is actually was made by a Palestinian elder woman. And that's what led me to sort of investigate that collection even further. I do want to mention this story to you, and I just have a few slides, and then you get to see a picture of my son, so stay tuned. But when I went to the Brooklyn Museum, which is, of course, also in New York, that was an anomaly. It was very interesting. I visited that museum last October, actually the morning of October 7th. I was there. I had intended to go with my friend, and we went anyways. And when we got to the Islamic art galleries, we walked into the presence of this beautiful dress. And this Thob is from Gaza. And the wall label for this dress was defiled. It had the wrong, first of all, it had the wrong information on it. I mean, I can just tell you that right now. It was just totally, but somebody actually went in a pen and wrote all over it. And it was a very emotional moment, and I'm sure all of you remember where you were on October 7th. We were all having, it was a very emotionally fraught time. And I remember saying, well, I'm going to try to identify this dress. So I contacted the curator afterwards, and by a few months later, I had that wall label updated. And what was interesting about the collection at the Brooklyn Museum was that the majority of their dresses were from Gaza. And I don't really know, how else to explain it to you, but there's sort of two routes that I'm finding Palestinian dress ends up in the United States or in North America as a whole. It's either through these Holy Land or sort of biblical dress and this kind of a route, or it's through these initiatives or like sort of charity work that's done, because Gaza was a place, the Gaza Strip after 1948 is what it was called. It was often, visited by, diplomats, missionaries, charity workers, and things like that. And they went and they volunteered or they worked there, and then they came back with collections that ended up infiltrating, in this case, the Brooklyn Museum. So this is all very important historical, social, political context that helps our community understand this material better. And that's what I'm hoping to kind of facilitate. And then another sort of type of dress, and I just want to mention this to you. This dress I have at the Museum of the Palestinian People. The chest panel itself is a Bethlehem chest panel. I'm sure you recognize it now because I showed you many Bethlehem chest panels by now. But the rest of the dress is a combination of fragments of other dresses. So we have, in this dress alone, we have Bethlehem represented, Gaza represented, El Ramle, and El Khalil, which is also Hebron. I have a fragment out there from El Khalil as well. So now we have 5 different villages representative in a single dress. How do you think that happened? Just going to give you a moment to think about it. So what happened was, after 1948, it started, and this was noted earlier about what was lucrative for tourism, right? This was mentioned in the past presentations. In the marketplaces in Jerusalem and in other places in Palestine, and at that time Israel, we see shopkeepers sort of, I don't know if they're Palestinian hands or they're not Palestinian hands, but they're sort of this amalgamation of all these fragments of embroidery to increase the price of the dress to sell it to tourists. So there's no sense of authenticity in terms of our dress and what it represented. And then you see this sort of, interesting sort of combination of villages. I mean, even now that I've pointed it out, it might be a little bit more unsettling when you're looking at the dress, the front and the back. I'm going to jump through a few of these slides. One of the main ways that our dress is represented in non-Palestinian scholarship, so this is another way that I've been able to kind of sift through the sources and try to understand what is authentic material that helps me, preserve and prevent cultural erasure. That non-Palestinian scholarship is often viewing our dress as Crusader fashion. And Crusader fashion in the sense that this was a style brought into Palestine during the Crusades. But we don't start to see, for instance, you see that steeple headdress there on the right, that like princess, the medieval princess kind of, that doesn't start to appear in France or in Europe until the late Crusades. But we have, other types of paintings and like biblical, they're of course Orientalist amalgamations as well, but painters like Bellini who did capture Bethlehem dress, in an earlier period. And I started to kind of take it further back. Well, how far back does some of this dress go? And does that question even matter? But it helps me explain not only sort of go against some of that non-Palestinian scholarship that casts our dress as a crusader fashion or a biblical costume. And it also helps me to kind of find more ancient origins for some of the pieces that we have still being made and worn today. Here, for instance, is some trajectory that I'm presenting regarding the tall headdress, which is from Bethlehem, which is the shetwe, and sort of going back in time and discovering how this was really a regional practice. The headdress making was a regional style, and at some point in the BCs wasn't even gendered to just women. It was perhaps also worn by men as well, but of high ranking. So still this headdress represents wealth, status, just as it did in the late 19th century, but maybe not quite as gendered as it was by the time it reached the late 19th century. And I've been doing headdress research as well. Last year, this last February, I went to Jordan and visited Taraz Center, which is the largest collection of Palestinian or Arab dress in the world, by Wadad Garwar. She is an elder that I also consult with, and I studied the headdresses there as well. And one of the main takeaways I sort of gained from this trip is that, these headdresses aren't just material wealth. They also represented family lineage and what was inherited and maybe traveled by that family, depending on who the ruler was that's on the coin. And kind of every generation that would inherit the headdress, they'll maybe add a coin. But also that some of the elements to the headdress were actually to protect from the evil eye. They were numismatic for many reasons as well. It's not just monetary. Like we look at currency coins and think money, wealth, but in the case of our headdresses, they actually represent so much more. And I just have a couple more slides, so I'm going to make it in time. Thank you all so much for staying for so late. But in one of these sort of final slides, I want to sort of share as well that some of the ways that, I'm validating the oral history of my community, because so much of this history of this culture, especially the ritual and the practice of tzitziris, has been passed through oral transmission. And in the world of like academia, this is a very challenging, sensitive space where presenting oral history as a form or a source of knowledge is still new, I should say. And what I'm finding is that oral history gives me a good clue into directions I should take my research. For instance, I was learning, I've always heard, these are real gold and real silver coins. But when I looked at, for instance, the headdress on the right at the Met, those aren't real gold. Those look like brass or tin. Like they look like decorative coins, right? So I brought in the Department of Scientific Research with their XRF portable instrument. We detected the metal composition, and it was actually brass, but it was gilded in gold. So they weren't wrong. It was gold. To what extent I was able to specify, like never before, but still, it was kind of interesting to see the oral history and the science behind material analysis today, and in all of its sophisticated ways, actually could marry together quite well and might bridge that gap of understanding between academia and this sort of like indigenous practice of storytelling. And just in my, little slide, I don't know if you can see my son, so cute. But while I was at Dada Center, I also was discovering other aspects to Palestinian dress history that's really been lost through these museums and these collections. And that has to do with the ability to touch. And so much in museums, and rightfully so, of course, they can't have, it damages. Textiles are very, they're like sponges, and even dust damages them over time. And if you're going to have and you're going to steward a collection of dress and textiles, you most certainly should have protocols that protect those textiles. But what is lost in all of that is when the cultural community in which those dresses and textiles belong are exiled and they have no other way to access those objects, those pieces of their own cultural heritage. Not being able to touch creates an obstacle to understanding the function, the form, the making of the piece. So much of my perspective as a maker is to look at an already created piece and to kind of work it backwards to figure out how to make it. But also there's certain function, like for instance, you can see me in the headdress on the left-hand side. That's a shetwe, it's a Bethlehem headdress, traditional, but there was no chin chain from one side to the other. So I couldn't even keep it on my head. That's why I'm laughing, trying to balance it on my head. So the chin chain is essential. In the next one, the circumcision vest from the 19th century that we stuffed my son in, and he did not want to be in, but we shoved him in. He was kind of wiggling around, and you could hear the coins moving, and you could hear the sound of what that ritual might have been at that time. My little sister, Safa, she's not so little. Yes, where do those coins come from? Yes, I just heard someone jangling their coins. The third image is of my little sister, Safa, and she put on a bonnet from Ramallah. There's this big padding, like horseshoe padding on the back side. And looking at it, I never really thought like what that was for. And it was to weight the coins so they wouldn't fall forward. And the coins actually didn't belong on the forehead like I always saw them on the mannequins. The coins were actually a headband. They should have been leaning behind your hairline. And then the padding goes right underneath where your neck is. And your hair is supposed to go into the bonnet. So being able to try these things on are essential for us to really not only understand their form and function, but also how to make them, how to continue to understand their value and the true expertise it took. And I just have to speak to this last image. I'm wearing what's called a Thob. It means a pocket dress. And it's a traditional style dress that's worn in Jericho area and for the Bedou, the nomadic people that flock their pastures around the Dead Sea. So that also is West Jordan as well. In some of the villages, they're like a salt. They had the Thob. The Thob is more than 2 to 3 times the length of your body. Okay, so if you were to just hang this dress from the ceiling, it just looks like a giant's dress. You'd be like, wow, who is that tall, Even I'm not that tall. So, but actually the Thob, the way you wear it, and think about it, Jericho, the Dead Sea, these are the lowest points on earth, right? And so there's a lot of humidity and heat. So this was a dress that was worn and belted so that extra fabric came over it, like I'm showing you in the image. That created a ventilation system because they spent most of their time outside. And that air would get trapped in their dress. So it was very smart thinking. But also the sleeves were so big. And apparently one sleeve is always more worn out than the other because they would put their baby in there. So it's just a completely genius. I mean, just have the baby here, maybe the groceries here, and just keep going. Just wonderful brilliance. But wearing the Thob helped me to better understand what that ventilation system might have felt like and why it was so important. Anyways, so the culmination of my work is in various publications on my website, and you're welcome to check it out. Thank you.
We could start first with like questions from the floor if there is any. So if you have, please kindly raise your hands and we'll get to you.
Hello, thank you so much, everybody. I just want to start off saying this is like really, it speaks to me, to my soul, because I'm Indigenous Taiwanese from the tribe, the Amis, and weaving and tactile and tangible ways of connecting with culture is like, it's everything to me. So thank you so much. I wanted to ask a question to Wafa quickly. And also, I wanted to say, like, when you talked about these stitching circles and having this courage to say things from the heart that you would never repeat anywhere else, that is such, I feel that I've heard so many things from my grandmother that I'm keeping with me to the grave, because because she was just so engrossed in her weaving, I think she almost forgot that I was there. But anyway, I really, what you said is so beautiful but heartbreaking, this idea of so many Palestinian people can't connect with an authentic version of their culture because what is represented in these museum spaces are kind of these kind of performative archetypes of like an imagined kind of piece of clothing. And I really loved what you were talking about at the end about, I think you said, like learning through touch and kind of experiencing these pieces for what how they're supposed to be experienced. And all of when you guys were talking is this idea of like these things are made to be used. They're made to be worn, like they're not made to be put on a wall. So what I wanted to ask, because this is something I struggle with like constantly, especially when thinking about, because I'm also an artist, so thinking about how to present indigenous work in art spaces. So I wanted to ask, which is going to be a really difficult question, but how can you imagine museum spaces, as you said earlier, like these museum spaces have a lot of authority over how we, especially as indigenous people looking at these works, because sometimes that's all we have. So how can museum spaces do better, and can they even do better? Like, is there even space for kind of reform, or should we imagine a new space? Like, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for being receptive to so much of what I was sharing. And that's a really excellent question that I grapple with all the time. I think that there's so much that the museum can do, and that includes reckoning with some of the sloppy record keeping that they've had on our dresses and our garments, and going into the provenance of these pieces and to figure out, if a costume designer, someone in the profession of costume design or that owned a theater house donated this, it might be worth noting that on the public record in case, they don't have a researcher to publish that kind of information. But I think provenance is really important. I think properly identifying based on the cultural communities, how they prioritize their attributions in dress, because every cultural community has a different sort of way. And I know that's all very low-hanging fruit. I mean, that's like a very low bar to set for a museum, but I think at minimum, building an accurate historical context is helpful as well, which I know is really challenging for museums, for institutions in general, especially when it comes to Palestinian dress, because so much of it is just saturated in political connotation, even if we're just talking about our dress and our embroidery. So I recognize that to be a challenge, but that's why you should consult with the people of the culture. And then I think when it comes to exhibition or connecting with the pieces, and maybe touch isn't the way, but reproduction, recreation, reconstruction, creating patterns, teaching the community how to connect with the patterns on the dress so they can stitch those patterns on a different garment and interact with the patterns and keep the memory of the maker alive through the patterns. These are all forms of legacy that museums have a hand, I think, in maintaining or breaking.
That's a very interesting point to actually leap off, because I think like this can also be sort of, the question can also be sort of like expanded to look at the Maori culture and also that of the Iban. So I also have a further question on that, because like other than talking about the presentation of indigenous traditions, material cultures within museums, but also like the contemporary context where the material culture of such traditions actually occur. And I was just wondering if you, Karl and Welyne, would be kind enough to expand on that further.
I think the museums have a role to play, and their role to play is to preserve. For myself as an artist, my role is to create, and it's to normalise the art so that it lives in the correct areas and spaces, so that it has relevance. It's to increase its domain like it was once increased before. And I believe that even the terminologies we use need to be corrected so that we don't use the term costume. Costume is like, let's play dress up. Regalia, and I learned that off our North American Indian relations, because they said, no, it's not a costume, Karl. You're wearing regalia, which is you wear your traditional form of dress. So I think the problem that has been done is that fabrication has crept in through the museums, and that is just trying to put us all into a nice little square box. And that's why I love the Thob that you spoke about that had 5 different areas, because I think every culture has suffered that, where we've just taken bits and pieces and combined it together to make a Frankenstein. It's really a Frankenstein, and it exists everywhere. You can go into any museum and find that at some point of time replication has occurred, and sometimes not within their culture, so that you have genuine Māori artefacts created in Africa. And anyone else wouldn't really know about that, but that was all the collection of when the empire was going out to collect from indigenous races, and if you couldn't obtain it from that particular place, well, let's go to another part of the world and they'll produce it. And then sometimes the styles and the arts move into other cultures. So an interesting thing for me was 2012, I was crossing the Solomon Islands. We were with other sets of weavers. I've forgotten one particular island refused to weave because they knew the Solomon Islanders could replicate and take their traditional designs, and they didn't want to put those designs out there. So, you know, what we sometimes perceive as being traditional has actually come from another area and infiltrated its way in. And sometimes it's through trade, but then other times it's through trying to standardise everybody. But once again, I think museums are to preserve. Our role is to create and make it accessible to our people.
Welyne?
For Iban community, is a little bit more intricate, like the textile itself, because they have costume, a real costume where they don with the headgear, all the silverwares, and it has nothing similar to the textile that they produce, but they do have a skirt which they call bidang or kain kabat, which is specifically only for the skirt, but not to be worn on the top. Yeah, so since this community have 3 different techniques of producing textiles, like embroidery, which is called songkit, and then they have this straightforward weaving that they produce a small scarf, long small scarf with some red and also silver thread, and it has nothing to do with the productions of the pua kumbu. In fact, pua is a blanket, is a shield. Only recently that it has been popularized in Tokyo and in Paris on the runway by a few designers who actually adopted the design into their garments and make it very contemporary. But it's also very controversial because some of the designers, in fact, I can't say use, but has commissioned these textiles to be in the size of 6 feet by 2 feet, and it was worn as a shawl, and it won some prize in the runaway in Tokyo, for example, and got some money, but the weavers was never acknowledged. You know, there's a kind of infringe of copyright and also the manipulations of design, which we have heard in all over the place. Yeah, so basically that's a problem. You know, whenever there's a display, people take pictures, they print, and there is these reproductions of design. And speaking about museum, I do appreciate museum try to make a lot of effort to display, but just how many can they display? Like for the Puā Kumbu, like for the past 10 years, I have been researching this. I have the names of almost 200 designs, and most of these designs are no longer exist. So some of the designs that we put forward are the one that has been gathered through memory. In fact, I was doing research on how to gather all that small memories from each weaver from different region, put them together. And when you speak about how your aunties and grandmothers speak about some stories that you do not want to repeat, it actually happened in the community of weavers that I was working with too. So they always continue or end or start the story and also the poems. So that's how I document all the poems that finally being interpreted, and they weave it. Once I gave a seminar, I said, I'm sorry to the curators, but if you're not one of them, don't feel sad. I said the curators are becoming part of the artifacts in the museum because there is no progressions trying to highlight all the intricacies, the history of the textile. So anyway, and the exhibitions that I did for the past, the last one I did was in 2017, and briefly I did in Washington Textile Museum. It's depicted the lost design. I only focus on the lost design. I did not want to display design which is available for you to see, you know, in collections. And these are the designs that you can find on eBay, or, you know, all those collectors who's trying to sell. There's a huge amount of money, 10,000 US dollar. You know, I feel that they are making money from other people's knowledge and taking advantage of the situations of the indigenous people who did not know the value of their textile. So I don't mean to criticize collectors. I mean, it's a good passion, it's a good hobby, but sometimes we forgot that this textile, this design represent the identity of the community. And I took pictures from a British museum when I was there, some designs that was not on display anymore. And I showed it to the master weaver. Speaking about it, I have goosebumps as well. And he said, oh, this is our old design, and we only have fragments of it, you know? And we try to create all those. Okay, so there's come the issue of authenticity, because you recreate. If you want cultural heritage to be continuously practiced, you need to be innovative, you need to recreate, you need to practice, right? Because it will enhance the skill and knowledge, and people or the weavers will start to be able to learn and listen, because there was no documentation. So the very first solo exhibition I did in 2016, the weavers created 75 designs only from memory. And it took me, it was from 2012 that I worked on that memory design. I actually have some of these 75 pieces display at the University Art Gallery in 2016, and I continue to do it in 2017. So human brain you cannot underestimate, because if it's helped with another indicator, bring back that story and poems. And after all, Puā Kumbu is about interpretations. So some of the collectors accuse me of butchering designs. And I said, how do we butcher? We are innovating what was created in the past. None of you have seen this design, this so-called design with this name. So how would you call this unauthentic, you know? It's coming from the mind of the master weavers, I said. We did not create it with AI, with computers. It is purely paperless. They created it directly on the thread without any references, without any measurements, without any drawings, none at all. And these are 70, 80-year-old women who don't even read and write, you know. So there goes the questions of authenticity. Me and some other scholars are grappling with this because some of the collectors say, oh, whatever is produced now, it is not authentic because it has nothing to do with the past. But they forgot history of people of the past are to be brought to the present. So I always say, this textile, you have to bring the traditional into the contemporary space because it reminds us about what happened in the past.
Can I add to that, actually?
Sure.
I think one of because many people ask me, like, well, what is the great success of Palestinian embroidery? Because if you were to look at other cultures in the region, like Syrian embroidery, Lebanese, Jordanian embroidery, it's far less preserved. It's more endangered than Palestinian embroidery. But look at the Palestinian people. I mean, we're against all odds able to continue to practice our art form. And I think the main success is that the art form evolves to reflect the identity of the maker and in lockstep with the maker to tell her story or then his story, depending on who's doing the embroidery. So there must be an element of preservation of tradition, but also of that innovation where we're telling our new stories, our new experiences, our new contexts.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. Well, there's actually a couple of things. One is we have artists out there who look at Indigenous designs and simply say, I like that, I'm going to take that. So that's where they reach over the culture just to snatch and grab, because I think we're in a modern age where people think, well, I can take what I like and I see. The second thing is with the authenticity. Now, I think there's an important thing that we sometimes forget, and that is, while some designs have faded into obscurity, it's still in the DNA of the people. And you'd be amazed sometimes, and I think everybody in the room here who may have had children, etc., will see when they look at their children, there are certain behaviours in them that they can see that have come from themselves or come from their grandparents or come from their great-grandparents. And you can actually see that transference. So even when it comes to a certain design sense, that design sense can actually skip generations and come back later on. So there's actually the ability to connect. Now, not all descendants of that one person can claim it, but the potential is there. So I think that's another important thing, is the transference.
Generation at a time. It could skip generations.
Yes, it can skip generations.
So who's to say? Yeah, if it's
because I've seen that happen in my own children. So skipping generations is one, but also sometimes when we tend to explore as an artist, we're in exploratory territory. So we can actually try designs and then we think later on, that didn't quite work. Or we can look at someone previous to us and say, well, at this point in time, they had just started out. At this point in time, they were at their peak. At this point in time, I don't think they knew what they were doing. So, it's different stages of life. We go through different stages. But I sometimes think when we try to intellectualize some of these arts, we're trying to explain away something that we can't explain. And sometimes it's a little bit more than that. That's my 5 cents worth.
That's quite a bit more. So anyway, I know we're running quite a bit behind time, and I just thought to wrap it up with one last question from the floor. However, If you have other questions, please note that this is just like the start of conversations to be, and the speakers will also be outside at the entry foyer presenting some of the textiles, and you can also approach them then if you have other burning questions that you wish to present. So, any one last question from the floor? I think the lady in pink, or Phoebe.
Thank you all for such a wonderful, exciting, fascinating, inspiring presentation from everyone. My question was, and I think it's something that's been kind of circling around in your discussion, and it's about when the design and the weaving and the work moves beyond the community. So you've all spoken so much about how much these things mean to your community, keeping these things alive as living traditions. But I suppose, especially as artists and creators as well, there is an interest in having the work move beyond the community too. And naturally, outsiders are going to be drawn to this kind of work. So what I want to ask is, Welyne gave the terrible example of, this design on the runway with the weavers not being acknowledged. But is there a good practice? Is there a way that you would want to see it happen? And what might that look like? Or for you, is it something that should be maintained within the community? It's not for the outside. How do you kind of feel about those issues, and how might you mediate those things?
Okay. Actually, the puakumu has been widely commercialized, but it comes with a tag acknowledgement to the weavers, where it comes from, and also not to be reproduced, but it's impossible to reproduce a very similar one, but it can inspire designs. But what we see again and again is it comes out in prints, exactly the same size. So that is a problem. And it also undermines buyers or the communities or other people who are interested in this textile. They become confused. They said, what is the original puakumu? How does it look like? So there's actually conflicting, conflicting presentation of this textile out there, because when they speak about puakumu, to their mind is something old, dirty, with holes. Then that's original. But when my community-based enterprise produce this kind of textile, they said, "Oh no, that's not authentic. We don't want to buy it," and blah 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 blah. Okay, so we basically have a few people who try to bring this textile into the market of designers. Okay, so I had my exhibition in Paris, which was attended by a few designers in Paris. It was organized by a designer friend. So they look at the textile, and my mistake was I was telling the story that is embedded in that textile, because it is a canvas of documentation. Anyway, they were scared to cut it. They were scared to make it into jackets or dresses, because they think that we will cut off the story. So how are we going to tell the whole story itself? So there is one challenge, and there's another challenge is that basically there is a market beyond the community, because there's a high demand on ethnic, authentic productions, because there's a lot of people out there really appreciate the original productions of indigenous people, especially indigenous communities. Okay, but again, it goes back to the questions, how long will this last? Because our weavers is 80, 70-year-old, we don't have new weavers. And we started to open up to weavers from other ethnic communities. We even have students from Taiwan, from Japan, from France, from Belgium, who basically come to learn how to produce the puakumu. So I think we have gone beyond that, but it's just that it's a very small niche market that you don't hear, you don't see, but the unauthentic one is taking over the market. Yeah.
Yeah, this is happening with the kofia scarf, the black and white checkered scarf. I don't know that there is, like, I can't imagine an answer to your question where it would be okay for it to move outside of the community. I think it always has to engage with the community, and whatever is happening has to be sourced back to the community. The problem is once it leaves the community, it immediately gets stripped of its origins, and especially in Indigenous communities, but also, like, specifically speaking to my own, in the United States, they're complicit with our erasure. Under what circumstances would the people of that country have any right to take it outside of our community? Like, they have an obligation to bring it back to the community. So I think that the specific historical context or contemporary context you're working within makes such a big difference, and I think community always has to have a hand. That's my personal.
I'd like to add two more things to that. One will be a real-time context of something that's actually happening now. Two is as an artist selling outside of your culture. So at a younger age, of course, I've sold outside of my culture. Today, and what I would have sold would be just to feed the family. Today, I would probably not sell outside and would probably sell inside my culture for 1/3 or even less of the cost that I could gain for it. And simply for the reason that it means more to me that it's present in our culture, being valued by our own, being used by our own, rather than going outside for monetary value. A real day example is today, the French hold the World Guinness Book of Record for the haka. The haka is I guess people misterm it as war dance. However, when I look at that, to me, anything of your culture shouldn't go outside and be held by somebody else, because first and foremost, who says that is actually authentic? And secondly, you have to have the Indigenous culture lead that. So unless someone from New Zealand, Māori, who is well versed in it, not just Māori descent, but actually a practitioner of the art, goes out there, goes and teaches the French people to do it, then you have some authenticity to it. Not somebody having a look saying, well, we can flap our arms, we can sew, we can throw these designs together, but there's no authenticity in it. So I don't believe it belongs outside of their culture unless the culture is there to help lead it. So yes, you can take it outside of New Zealand, you can take it outside of any one of our countries, but it has to have our involvement in there to say, yes, this is authentic, not just a basic grab and steal. So that's my 5 cents worth.
Just one sentence. It also happened to like all different type of traditional dance. And 2 days ago, I came back and I saw these 2 Pakistan students who are exchange students. So she proudly showed me that she's learning the Borneo dance, okay? And you know how many ethnic groups in Borneo? You know how many, right? So she showed me all those parts. I said, I know all those movements because I used to be a traditional dancer before, so I know which movement belongs to which ethnic groups. But for her, oh, this is a Borneo dance. I said, no. I said, this belongs to the Bidayu. This belongs to the Iban. I said, this belongs to this Orang Ulu. And she was arguing with me. So that's what I'm talking about. You see? When we have some people confuse other people who do not know the roots and history of our art, it is a bad news for the community. I was really upset with the choreographer. So I actually am going to meet him next week to make him to put him in his place, because he himself is not coming from any of these ethnic groups. Our dance are very graceful, you know, with all those feathers and everything, the way I dance now. But they were making it like this. I feel humiliated, you know? So that's how it feels like when you see your culture has been, I would say, has been raped. Yeah, it goes to ruin. And it's very sad. So I do feel that for textile it's the same. I mean, I remember in Latin America, it was in Peru, or I don't remember. They were protesting because a designer took their design for runaway and never acknowledged, and he earns lots of money. And I tell you, some of these designers that I know who took Puā Kombu textile to patch on jackets, there's actually a designer from Singapore. I don't want to say the name. I gave a few pieces for the Rainforest Fringe Festival back in 2017. She was putting it everywhere, like 3-4 different designs, and you combine with batik. So where does this textile stand in terms of identity, presentation? It become a confusing culture. Food, you can do fusion, but textile design, please.
Yeah, and I know that we're like running out of time, but I just want to say that, just to answer your question as well, that I think anyone that's not part of the culture that wants to contribute in a positive way, they would platform leaders from that community. So if a museum stewards a collection and they can't put it on permanent view, they should bring in a cultural leader, a community leader, who might be able to engage with the broader community and discuss those particular cultural objects, So it's like, as long as that outside entity is platforming or supporting or doing something to amplify the work of the culture and the community themselves, I think that unless it's doing that, that's where I feel their problem. It's morally bankrupt.
Yeah. Okay. Done. Head is different. Yes. This is centipede. Okay, this is millipede. And this is clouded leopard. So this textile is one of my community development. And it hangs usually.
Just starts expanded. So it was platted up first, and then
Everybody else. And so, and having the kids there do it just makes it so much easier. And then
so if you put your hand
so this one,
it's a nice. It is. I love that it's extracted from that link.
Not bad. Of course, we do when we move around the country.
So that it's always. It's quite a tough plant, and it's.
But I'll be back up. You see an emergence like this is the curvilinear motif diamond uprising, and you start to see kind of more. I've been mostly in New York. Yeah, mostly, but you've got to take it, and you got to be in the mood. Some days, and adhering to the discomfort.
Kind of solidarity of like sense of understanding.